All righty then. Let's get to our scriptures this morning. We're still talking about Father Abraham. We're in Genesis chapter 12. And I love talking about Father Abraham. I love talking about his journeys and the path that God led him on to get him to the promise. And Abraham, for as long as Abraham lived, and for everything that Abraham did, Abraham died without seeing the 100% fulfillment of the promise. But he did receive parts of the promise that God gave him on the way. He did receive a seed. He did see. He did get to see that. He did get to experience that. Mm-hmm. So for everything that we believe Abraham might not have seen, what he did see was worth it. Was worth the journey. Was worth the travel. Today, we're in Genesis chapter 12. We're going to go through verses 10 through 20. And the aspects of the encounter there. It's fairly brief, so we may not be long today, amen.
That's all right, Pastor.
Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 through 20. And it just basically breaks it down into two sections. Because we left off with Abraham leaving out. Leaving out of where God comes to Abraham, says, get up and get out of the land of your fathers. Leave the land of your fathers. He says, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house to a land that I will show thee. And Abram goes. And that's where we left off. And we left off with God having spoken the promise of land unto Abraham. And we have Abraham going up into the mountain of Bethel, and he on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he builded an altar to the Lord, and he called upon the name of the Lord. And Abraham journeyed, going still toward the south. So Abraham's still moving, keeping it moving. He received his promise from God. He says the land that was promised unto him, he didn't make the mistake of saying, okay, the journey must be over. But even though God spoke, okay, I'm going to give you this land for your seed and your descendants. Abraham, God didn't say stop. God didn't say camp here. God didn't say this is the place where I need you to stay. Mm-hmm. So he knew that his purpose was to get to a land that God would show him. And even the promise where he was in that place, and God made the promise of that land, Abraham had a knowing that, okay, it's not time to stop here yet. Mm-hmm. So he pressed on. They kept going on. And that's where we come to verses 10 through 20. In verse 12. And verse 10, I'm going to read verses 10 through 13 here. It says, and there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there. For the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he came near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, behold, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say this, they shall say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, that thou art my sister, that it may be well with me, for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. He just received a promise from God. He just worshiped God and called upon the name of the Lord. Okay? And he's on his journey that God has called him to, that God has purposed and said, look, I'm going to show you, go travel until you get to this land where I'm going to show you. Okay? And so Abram does it by faith. He takes off. There's no objection. There's no delay. He just presses on the journey. After God speaks this promise, he thinks, oh, okay, we're headed into Egypt now. We're headed into Egypt. So this might happen, so I got to come up with this plan to protect myself. This plan to protect myself. Now, here's a little sidebar. Abraham was 75 when he took off. Sarah was 65. 65. Think about 65 today. And Abraham tells Sarah, "Behold, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon." Sarah still had it going on at 65. And it wasn't just spousal attraction. It wasn't just, Abraham looking upon the one that he had chosen as his wife and saying, "Oh yeah, that's my wife, she's so fine." But he knew that when they got into Egypt, that 65-year-old Sarah, they were going to look upon her and see what he saw. And knowing that it was Egypt, what their culture is in the land of the Pharaohs, they're going to see how fine you are, and they're going to kill me if they know you're my wife. So don't tell them you're my wife. Tell them you're my sister, which was technically not a lie. It was his half-sister. And because in the cultural, in that time, if you had the same father but not the same mother, you were halves. If you had the same mother, different fathers, you were still whole. There wasn't a half or a step there.
All right.
But if you were, so they had the same father but not the same mother. So they were half brother and half sister. But when they got married, wife trumps sister. You don't present her as your sister. You present her as your wife. Okay? So Abram, he comes up with the plan. He says, all right, this is what's going to happen, okay? And so I need you for my sake, because you're going to live no matter what. They kill me and take you, you're going to live, okay? But this way, we can both, we're going to both make it through, all right? So he said, all right. And so, and what's significant here is throughout verses 10 through 20, we read it in King James, you can read it in any other. Sarah doesn't say a word. We don't have one quote from Sarah in all this, in these 10 verses here. With everything that went on, we don't get one quote from Sarah. We don't get one inkling of what she's going through. We don't get one idea of what's going on inside Sarah. But I offer the way that God protected her, the way that God watched over her, the way that God preserved her through this entire situation, let me know that the one thing that we know was going on inside Sarah that manifested itself on the outside was submission. Submission. A hard word to hear. Almost a dirty word in some places. Was that one message you came up with? She said the S word. But Sarah's whole attitude throughout this was submission. In the 10 through 13, you have Abram coming up with this, seeing what the possibilities were, coming up with this idea. Just say that you're my sister. We don't see Sarah rebuking Abraham. We don't see Sarah offering opinion, offering an alternate plan. We don't see Sarah doing any of that. We don't hear it. We don't read about it going on here. And God, He doesn't hide the dirty details from us. He shares those dirty details. We know what happened when Lot, his wife, got turned into a pillar of salt, and him and his daughters were in the cave. We know what happened. We know what happened when Tamar deceived Judah. We know what happened. We know what happened when Job was on his sick bed and his wife said, came against him. We know what happened. God doesn't hide dirty details. He doesn't hide the dirty details. So when we're right here, we don't hear anything. We don't hear any objection from Sarah. We don't hear anything. Throughout this whole passage, we don't hear anything. Verses 14 through 20 now, it says, "And it came to pass that when Abram came into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair." Again, apparently Sarah still had it going on in a real good way. Because the Egyptians, whoever encountered, they're talking about her. Did you see who came in? Did you see? Verse 15, "The princes of Pharaoh saw her and commended her before Pharaoh." That's how well she had it going on. It was passed up the chain. Sarah was on the gossip mill, and it wasn't even gossip. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And he entreated Abraham well for her. He compensated Abraham well for her. And he had sheep and oxen and he-asses, donkeys, manservants and maidservants and she-asses and camels. So, Pharaoh hears about how fair this woman is. He didn't ask how old she was. How fair was this woman? Okay, I must have her. I must add her to my harem. And he sends for her. He takes her away from Abraham. Abraham lets her go. Abraham doesn't fight for her. Abraham doesn't object. In fact, Abraham receives compensation. He didn't ask for any. But he receives everything that Pharaoh offered. Wow. I can't think of one woman today who would agree to that, who would who would submit herself to that type of arrangement, that type of transaction going down. Granted, it's majorly a cultural thing going on, for how things, went down back then. But even today, there's no wife that would submit, that would yield to that type of situation, that would even agree to it when Abraham presented it. But here we have the transaction goes down. And look at this now. Here we have Abram, called by God, called out. He's on a purpose. He's on a purposeful mission, a purposeful journey by God. He's into the journey. God has spoken the promise of land unto him, spoken that he's going to become a great nation, that whoever blesses you, see that? Well, that hasn't come about yet. But he's received the promise of the land. He's received the promise. And now he's on the journey. He's on the journey. He's into this situation now. And here it is. He comes to this. He comes into Egypt, and he comes up with this plan to preserve himself. Pharaoh comes. Pharaoh takes Sarah away from him. He's compensated for her, and he receives in exchange again sheep, oxen, and you know that it wasn't just like one or two of each. We're talking about Pharaoh. And okay, so there had to be a great many of each for this to be. So he got oxen, he got sheep, he got oxen, he got he-asses, men servants and maid servants, and she-asses and camels. men servants and maid servants. Men servants and maid servants. Maid servants. Who was the mother of Ishmael? Hagar. What was Hagar's lineage? Egyptian. Where did this just take place? In Egypt. So, here we have it. When Abram comes up with his plan, contrives this plan in his head, does God come down and rebuke him for not having faith? Does God rebuke him for not protecting his wife? Does God rebuke him for... No, he doesn't. He allows it to go down. God allows all of this to go down. God knows the end from the beginning.
Yes.
He knows everything. God already had Romans 8 and 28. He already had that, okay? Abram didn't. Sarah didn't. Sarai at the time, she didn't have that. God already had that. So, in this endowment to Abram for Sarah, he receives Hagar.
Yes.
Among other things, sheep, camels, all these other men servants, maid servants, and Hagar. And so, but he allows Abram to go through with this plan.
Yeah.
Again, he knows what he's going to do. And as soon as, and there's no specific time frame mentioned, but you know it's got to be fairly quick. Fairly quick. Because of what didn't happen, because of the words of Pharaoh, because Abram was still in the vicinity, for one. So, okay, and he entreated Abraham well for her sake, and he had sheep and oxen, he asses, and maidservants and maidservants, and men servants and maidservants, and she asses and camels. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Because of Sarai, Abram's wife. She says not a word. She agrees to Abram's plan.
Yes.
When Pharaoh takes her from Abram, brings her into his presence, Abram is compensated for it. We hear nothing from Sarah. But as soon as the deal is complete, the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with plagues, with great plagues. With great plagues. Because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Not his sister. Because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Not because of what Sarai said. Not because of everything she said. Not because of everything she did. But because of her presence in a place where she didn't belong.
Yes.
But what enabled her to be preserved and protected and cared for and watched over like that was her submission. She wasn't combative. She wasn't self-preserving. Abraham, we call Abraham the father of faith because God said move, and he moved. Sarah had to have some faith.
Yes.
She demonstrated some faith because it takes faith to be able to submit like that. Woo! Goodness. It takes some faith.
Yes.
We're talking. Jesus said you had to have faith of a mustard seed, and you will kill, and you can ask a mountain to move. I believe Sarah could have moved a mountain at that moment. Sarah could have moved 2 or 3 mountains in that moment. To be taken away from your husband and to brought into the presence of a king, to be added to her harem, knowing what the whole purpose of her being there was for. She wasn't there because of her cooking skills. She wasn't there because of her house cleaning skills. She wasn't there because of her clothes weaving skills. She was there because at 65, she was a very fair looking woman and desirous. So she knew why she was there. But she said and did nothing. I know if I were a woman and I'd been put in that situation, there would have been, even when Abram presented the idea, there would have been some objection. Maybe some neck moving, the hand and all of that kind of stuff. There would have been some objection. It's like, wait a minute, hold up, player. We serve the one true God.
Yeah.
We ain't got to come up with no plans, devices like this. We don't have to do anything like that. You're supposed to be the leader.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be the spiritual head of this house. Why are you coming up with a plan like that? What's up with you? Do I need to not follow you? Do I need to go my own way because you are not following God? Yeah. Do I while fingers are pointed at you, but we don't see one line, we don't see one quotation, we don't see one word of action about Sarah other than that she submitted. Wow. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Verse 18, and Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is it thou hast done unto me? Why dost thou not tell me that she was thy wife? It doesn't even say here that God came unto Pharaoh and said, you dirty dog, you took another man's wife. It didn't say God said that. It doesn't say an angel appeared unto Pharaoh. It doesn't say anything like that. It doesn't say Sarah told him, I don't belong here. I'm his wife, not his sister, and I shouldn't be your wife. It doesn't say anything like that. But something dawned on Pharaoh. Them plagues got all up on him. So something sunk in. Oh yeah. Something, there's your wake-up call, ding, ding, right there. He says, why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you tell me she's your sister? What's wrong with you, man? What I do to you? Come on, bruh. He said, why does thou say? He said, so I might have taken her to me to wife. He said, no. Behold thy wife. Take her and go thy way. Take her and go thy way. You ain't got to go home. I don't know where you're from, but you got to get out of here. You get it, just get.
Yeah.
Here, just get.
Take everything with you.
Take it out. Get. Just, get. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away and his wife and all that he had. He didn't take back any of the stuff he gave Abram. He could have done that. But he was too scared. He didn't even want to risk it. He didn't want anything back, to take anything back. He didn't want to be, because I'm sure he thought, well, if I take all of that back, it's been in Abram's house. And I already know what happens when I take stuff from Abram. I don't want more plagues. I don't want more plagues on mine. So, you know what? What I gave you for her, here, take her back. Blackjack, no take backs. Just take her and get on your way. And get on your way. Through that entire passage, 10 verses, 11 actually, 10 through 20. Sarah said not a word. Sarah said not a word, but her submission spoke for her. her submission let God do the work. Her submission brought plagues upon Pharaoh and his house. Not just plagues, great plagues. Great plagues. Generations and generations later, when Pharaoh, one of the successive pharaohs, was refusing to let Israel, the children of Israel go, those weren't even referred to as great plagues. 10 of them. 10 plagues. But they weren't even referred to as great plagues. Well, based on Pharaoh's rebellion. Pharaoh, God had hardened his heart by continually presenting himself to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh just continuing to resist. But Sarah's submission brought great plagues upon Pharaoh, not just on him, but his whole house. That's his wife, children, servants, animals, his entire estate, is how we would refer to it as today. But her submission, ultimately, more to God than anything. To honor God with who she was, gave God that room. Gave God that room, that leeway to work and manifest himself in that entire situation. And God being who he is like, okay, Abram, you know what? I'm gonna let this go. But you're gonna pay down the line. There'll be consequences for this action. Not punishment. Not punishment. Because he got to bear Ishmael. And even when Sarai was treating Hagar and Hagar tried to run away, she got sent back in. So Abram got to keep his son for that much longer. But his decision way back here to come up with his own plan to preserve himself, and instead of saying, no, this is my wife, and Pharaoh, he didn't know what Pharaoh was going to say. And Pharaoh now saying, well, if you'd have told me she is your wife, I wouldn't have took her. Oh, yeah, all right, okay, Pharaoh. We know how you act. We know how you act. You might have killed him and taken her anyway, but anyway, But Abram's inability in that moment to say, no, that's my wife. Because he received the gifts for her when he should have stood for her. Down the line, the promise of his seed.
Yes.
When he now again, as Sarah's suggesting, they were cohorts in this, and the union with Abram and Sarah, and it was spoken of Ishmael that he would be against everyone. And that even after he grew and Isaac was born, and he began to mock Isaac, and even unto this very day where the descendants of Ishmael contend with the descendants of Isaac, even to this very day, because way back here in chapter 12, Abram had his own plan to protect himself.
Mm-hmm.
And his plan to protect himself, that seed of self-preservation, Abraham being a great nation. When you're a great nation, whatever seed is planted in you is going to grow. That is why God made that promise of Ishmael even. He will become a great nation. And his great nation will contends against Abram's great nation as we speak. So in that moment where he chose to preserve himself, produced the seed and the situation that would grow into lasting contention against his line.
Yes.
where he chose to preserve himself.
Mm-hmm.
Self-preservation. God did not punish him in that moment. Did not punish him. Did not rebuke him. Did not show up and say, "What are you doing?" Could have shook him. He could have. He's God. But he knows the end from the beginning. So he allowed him. He allowed him. So that's why we have to be careful about our decisions in every moment. Even in that moment when we get a revelation, okay, oh, that wasn't right. Lord, I repent, and the future consequences for that action. That's not saying God is punishing me down the line. No, he's not. He's simply letting it play out because he knows the end from the beginning. He knows. Now, the descendants of Ishmael that contend against the descendants of Isaac to this very day, they won't win. They can't win. They might seem to have the upper hand in at certain moments, this, that, and the other, but those who are called by God's name still have his favor. The children of God still will prevail. Always and forever shall. But we in our moments, if we remember that Sarai allowed herself to be put into a very uncomfortable, potentially harmful situation, trusting God, her silence, her submission gave God the room that he needed to work to preserve her, to reveal himself to Pharaoh, and to work the circumstance in Abram's life to where, he would have to watch a son. He would have to watch a son. He would have to put a son out of his camp. He would have to put his very bloodline out of his camp because of that brewing contention. It had begun. He had no idea to the extent, but he knew that the child of his production didn't have greater precedence than the child of the promise. He knew that his production, his produce, his product didn't outweigh the child of the promise. The child of God's promise. So we see. I don't want to. I almost just jumped chapters ahead. God started out on something whole different. But that's our outtake today. We have Sarah, whose submission preserved her. And we look at Christ. Christ submitted to the whole cross crucifixion experience. He submitted to all of that. Didn't defend himself. He could have ended it at any moment. Sarah couldn't have ended it. Sarah had no choice, really, in all of that. Her husband, the head, and a king, and all of this, she really had no say in what was going on. So she couldn't. Christ could have. But he submitted. And because he submitted, God exalted his name above every name. His name is greater than the name of any disease. His name is greater than the name of any banking institution. His name is greater than the richest man on earth. Jesus' name is greater. Because at Jesus' name, demons tremble. At any other name, they giggle. They laugh and they put their feet up. They light up cigars. Victory cigars. Because in any other name, if it ain't Jesus, they know they have victory. They know they can win. They know they have a shot. but at Jesus' name. See? And that's where we find ourselves. Don't fear submission. Fear insubmission. Insubmission pushes God aside. Insubmission gets in God's way. He's the mighty God. He can part a sea. He can bring plagues. But if our stiff-neckedness stands in the way, it's not that he can't move, but he won't. He resists the proud. How many stiff-necked Israelites made it into the promised land? 0. 0. The generation that told Joshua, we will follow you, submission. We will follow you as we follow Moses. That was the submissive generation. They're the ones that got into the promised land. Submission gets us into the promise. Submission gets us to the promise. Submission got Sarah to the promise. Got her out of the perilous situation and catapulted her into the promise. Her submission secured her preservation. We submit to God in the same way. We submit to God in the same way. Sarah was so, it's baffling the level of submission she had to have had, the level of faith she had to be able to have to submit in that situation. But the way God was able to move, as soon as the deal was sealed, plagues came down on the one who had. And it wasn't even malicious intent, but selfish intent. Selfish intentions. Lured her into his selfish intentions. Cost him. Great plagues upon him and his household. So that's our takeaway. The submission of Sarah, Abram's self-preservation, and what it led to, and how God was able to work all things out to continue his plan. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Let's give God some praise this morning. Because he was